Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. This is a bit of a special edition one that maybe will be a bit regular in the future. I mentioned recently I really wanted to do some more Academy stuff on the channel because it's so hard to keep up with for all of us out there. And so I have a special guest here today, which is Academy Arena UTD at Academy Arena United on Twitter, X, or whatever, what have you. Many of you may know him, follow him, all of that, but somebody who keeps up on the latest with the youth level, with the academy level. And I will say it's been hard, not just in the States, but everywhere to keep up with it in the last few years. The coverage has gone down,
Yeah.
things like that. So I figured this would be a really nice thing to add that we really haven't had on this channel at all to have this kind of content. So how are you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm doing good, man. Yeah, I'll do my best. I'll do my best.
No worries. And so you recently, you've kind of wanted to get going as well on making some videos to help keep people informed. And I know you've done a couple that I've watched, right?
Yeah, I've just started. I think I've done about like 3 or 4 videos so far. So just
Cool.
started up. Like I said, you just now, it's the first time I've ever come on someone's channel. So looking forward to doing that as well. Welcome to the YouTube audience.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. So, and I'll put some links below, for
Yeah,
for
thank you.
Twitter, but also for your YouTube account and all that. So anybody watching, go follow them because I want to have you back on regularly, but at the same time, as you get to making your own more regularly too. I hope people will watch and follow that. Um, okay, so the academy, it's just such a huge subject at United. The
Mm,
history, the past, present, future, all of it. When we look at the team, I mean, everything that's going on right now, it's like academy players at the forefront of everything. We've got
yeah.
from Rashford, who's been here since he was, 9 years old, who's now maybe departing after all this time. To there's chat about Garnacho who came to the academy, to
Mm.
all of this and these young players that have come through. It's such a rich history
It's
in general.
it's the reason, James, why I started watching them like properly was because of just how bad the first team was.
Right.
I'm not ashamed to admit that. I think a lot of people, if you speak to them, would probably say the same kind of thing. It was in sort of like the 2020-2021 season that I like really got into watching them, and we didn't actually have too bad of a season first team wise that year, but
Yep.
um, that's why I just love watching the academy, and anyone perhaps who's a newcomer to kind of academy football, I'd highly encourage you to watch them because it's just I always find it as like that little bit of escapism from football because
Hmm.
the first team obviously that's the priority, right? But academy football you can kind of just sit back, enjoy, watch players develop, and it's just really really enjoyable, and you don't sort of feel sour after a loss or sort of drop points. You kind of just you're there to enjoy and watch players develop, and that's kind of like the most important thing. I find that now that I'm kind of like 4 or 5 years in and I run the pages that I do, I often find that I'm getting as passionate, if not more passionate, when we lose or sort of get a win. So it's a bit different for me. But yeah, anyone that's perhaps new to academy football, I really encourage you to start watching because yeah, like I said, it's great.
Yeah, awesome for sure, and I definitely agree with that. I mean, when I was watching it before when they broadcast more games. I mean, back in 1920 in the U.S., we used to get most of the games back then. I think at least the under 23s level at the time.
Yeah.
We learned a lot watching guys like Chong, and Garner, and these guys kind of come through, and
Mm.
then the next batch of players that kind of come along, and that's really it's cool to see that, and it definitely provides a little bit of that escapism because you're just sort of encouraged to enjoy it for what it is, right? And you're watching these
Yeah.
young players and what the focus is.
I mean, when I was a kid, I've actually still got it in my mum's house somewhere, but I had a Pogba 42 shirt the year he left. Like
Nice,
literally the
nice.
year he left. I got it the summer that he left. And I had like the gold badges on it and everything. And I remember turning up to football training and being like, this is the new kid on the block. Like he's going to be the next big thing. And literally like a month later, he left. So I've always kind of liked the academy in that sense. Like I've always watched them on YouTube, like the goals and stuff. And yeah, like I said, in sort of like that 2021 season was where I really started, you know, following them passionately, and sort of keeping it up to date.
Yeah, awesome. And Is it kind of painful sometimes? Like, we've seen a lot of hope. Obviously, there's always a lot of hope in the academy, right? And then
Mm.
you see players kind of come through and for so many times I try to warn people a little bit, not to not enjoy the academy level, but because it's too easy, I think, to get sucked in to think, these there's 10 players there who are gonna end up in the United first team, and they're the future, and you're gonna watch them, for the next 10 years in that senior level, and obviously it rarely works out that way.
I think that's sort of the topic that you're on about there is actually like a really good segue into sort of I think Toby Collier at the moment.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I'm not trying to put like a damper on the situation, but obviously for anyone that doesn't watch the academy often, you see the player perhaps come into the first team and they'll do like really, really well or they're impressed. And you think like that player has had like that similar development or the similar sort of skill set of someone like Manu, for example. I
Yep.
mean, like how many players have we seen over the years that come into the first team out of nowhere and do really, really well for like a short period of time, and everyone thinks that like sort of they're the next big thing, and they just kind of fall away. But if you were to ask or have a conversation with someone perhaps that was into the academy that had watched that player
Yes.
for a long, long time, they could tell you that that was probably the most probable outcome. And
Yeah.
with Collier, I just like just on the point of sort of the expectation side of things is just understanding that he's come in and done really, really well, but the sort of expectations compared to perhaps some of the other players that have come in recently, for like Mainu and Garnacho, for example, he's not had quite that same level of performance since he's joined. Um, I remember when he joined us. So I messaged a lot of the sort of England youth players that he was playing with at the time that played for United and sort of asking them like, what's this guy about? Is he good? Sort of thing. All of them said, this guy's top, right? And in sort of like the 3 or 4 years that I've watched him, I've just not seen kind of like a level that sort of would expect me to think that he's going to be a first team player.
Right.
But something that I found really, really interesting is, do you know who Neil Harris is?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so the academy coach that left, I think it was last year,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So he spent, I think it was like 20 years at the club, and
Yep.
he recently said in an interview that they asked him, "What are two things that you look out for in an academy player? Like, what is it that they need to be able to achieve in the game, essentially?" And he said that they need to have an exceptional ability that they can do something that no one else on the pitch
Mhm.
can do as good as them. And he also said that they need to love the game. And those two things really, really sort of resonate in Collier's situation because we've seen in that FA Cup game, right? He is an exceptional athlete and he
Yes.
is above pretty much any player in his age group for that kind of aspect of his game. So he's got that like exceptional ability in that sense. Um, and in terms of like loving the game, I've noticed in the 3 interviews that I've watched of him. So he did an interview before a 21s game once where they played at Old Trafford, and he was talking about kind of what it means to play for the club, what it means to play for the academy, what it means to play for Old Trafford, all this sort of stuff. And then the other interviews after the preseason game against Arsenal, and also after he received his Premier League debut ball, you notice that he's really, really switched on. And I know
Mhm.
that doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean like love of the game, but you can tell that this guy knows what it means to play for the club, and he's sort of got that attitude that he's going to make it. And did you see what Amarim said today about him?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, he said he really wants to learn, and
Yep.
that
Yep.
kind of stuck with me a little bit. And it's sort of he's in that range, isn't he, where he's not got like that exceptional ability in terms of like on the ball, and he
Yeah.
doesn't sort of wow you when you watch him play, but he's in that kind of like McTominay range where he's got that ability off the
Some
ball, and
physical
that can take you
traits
a
and
long
things
way.
they can bring, yeah, that are lacking too, especially at United in the last
Yeah,
few years, even at the senior level. And I think that's a lot of what Amram was praising him for as well. But the physical ability that he has, the athleticism, we can see. He brought him on right instead of Casemiro and Eriksson. Now, Casemiro and
that was
Eriksson are
quite
two
telling, wasn't it?
players, yeah, two players that are obviously talent wise, I mean, top in world
Yeah.
football at a senior level, but the athleticism has faded, right? The physical levels have faded. and it's valuable. And so it does present a little bit of that conundrum with Collier, where he has those physical traits, but like as you've said, it's the same that I've heard of anybody I've spoken with. Is there enough of the rest for him to get there? And I think as well, people have to realize United, where we're going, the jump is really high, right? To be a
Yeah.
squad player or a first teamer at a, I mean, obviously this season we're low, but to be a squad player, a first teamer in the championship, or in, at a lower table club, or in some different leagues in Europe, might be a different qualification than it is to make that big jump to the top of United, and where we're aiming to go, where sometimes it's not enough just to be a top
Mm.
athlete, just like it may not be enough to be ultimately very skilled. And we've seen
Yeah,
both
I was
come through.
I was watching your stream after the Arsenal game, and you said exactly what I said on Twitter, sort of hours after the game. I sort of said that really, really pleased for him. That was like the main
Yes.
thing, but sort of more long-term concerns about where we want to go as a club. And you said the
Yeah.
exact same thing on the stream. You said like the environment that we played that game against Arsenal is not going to be derivative of the direction that Amrin wants to go under long
Yes.
term. We
Yes.
want to be a team that has more possession, um,
Yeah.
and that isn't sort of defensively, of course, defensively very resolute, but not kind of having that structure of being a defensive team. So there's going to be more requirements for him on the ball. And I'm not quite sure whether or not he's there yet. But and just linking it back to like the academy, I remember sort of last season, and this is why I've been quite sort of shocked, but also equally happy
Mhm.
for him that he's been included, is that only last season he was playing for the 21s, and I'm watching him play, and I'm thinking, right, you're the senior player of the team now, you're in midfield. I want you to
Yeah.
show me, take control of this game, and show me sort of what this kind of like hype's about, right? And you were having players that were like 16, 17 coming in and playing better than him and showing more.
Right.
And so when he started training with the first team, it was a bit of a shock to me. But you kind of think the direction that Ten Hag was taking us under,
Yeah. Sure.
he fits the mold of what perhaps Ten Hag wanted to do in that kind of like
Right.
third season, the transitional team, right? The sort of someone with legs,
Got to
someone
eat
that
up
can
a
cover
lot of
space.
ground. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. All the time. Yep.
he fit that
Yep.
perfectly. So then him coming
Makes
into the
sense.
first team environment then made a lot of
Interesting.
sense. Um, so so yeah, and I was thinking earlier on just about Colley as a topic, and I don't want to just you know compare him to McTominay just because he can run, but
Right.
you look at the job McTominay did for us over a number of years, and obviously he splits opinions, right? And there were games that I used to get very frustrated with him. But he did a job, right?
Yeah.
And if Collier can, keep it simple in midfield and do the basics, and show sort of the levels that he did against Arsenal, then why not? Why can't we have him as squad player?
Yeah.
That was something that I put out on my socials the other day. Is that I think we need more academy squad players moving forward,
Yeah. Yeah.
because the amount of money that we've spent on players that I really think players in the academy could do the exact same job, right? And if he
Yes.
can come
Yes.
in for 10, 15 games a season, early round Carling Cup games, FA Cups, sort of easy home ties. For example, against Southampton on the weekend, right? You'd like to think that potentially he could get some minutes,
Yeah.
rather than us spending 40 million on a squad player that's going to do the same thing. So, I'm rooting for him. I said it the other day, I'm rooting for him. Hopefully, you know, um, and with the whole like physical side of things as well, you can't teach that. That's something that you can't teach, and
Yes.
he's already got that. Whereas the technical things, I do think that there's a certain level, a certain cap that players can obviously reach. He's not going to have a technical ceiling like Kobe Mainu, but he's
Right.
going to be
Yep.
able to be improved on the ball, and
Yep.
obviously tactically as well. I've got more faith in a coach like Ruben Amorim having someone like Toby Collier, because the system can accommodate someone like that. You can have perhaps a few players that aren't so good on the ball, whereas
Yeah. In his
perhaps under Ten
midfield.
Hag,
Yeah. Yep.
that wasn't really an option. But
Yep.
yeah, I'm looking forward to sort of seeing him over the next coming months. I'd imagine if I were to sort of hazard a guess, if I were to guess, I would say that we're probably going to let him go in the long run. but who knows? You never know with these sort of things. There's certain players like Collyer, and there's so many of them in the academy right now, where you can't necessarily predict what their ceiling is. You don't quite know whether or not they're going to be on loan at League One next season, or whether or not they're going to be in the first team. There isn't
Yep.
necessarily many Kobe Mainus right now in the academy, which is obviously
Right.
understandable, right?
Yeah.
To have someone of Kobe's ability, you kind of can see that straight away. But I would say, we might get into this later on as well, is that
Yeah, for
a
sure.
lot of players at the moment are kind of in that mid range where, like I said, you don't quite know what their ceiling is, and I think Collier kind of fits into that category.
Yeah,
Do you mind
that
if I just
makes a
have a
lot of
drink quickly? Is
sense.
that all right?
Yeah, yeah, of course, of
Sorry,
course.
apologies.
No,
Yeah, I just
no,
got a
you're
dry mouth.
good.
My bad.
And as you were saying it, it's not like about being negative on him. It's about, balancing expectations too, because it happens very often. That the hype gets there, and it's just about understanding what these players can be. But I am certainly excited to see him ideally between now and summer. I'd rather see him coming on the pitch than Casemiro at this point in time, and I'd
Yeah.
rather I'd rather see him getting those minutes and seeing what he can do. I mean, who knows, right? And what can happen there, in that sixth position. So, especially as like a defender and helping in those kinds of situations. So, excited to see that. And what I wanted to kind of transition to asking you is that, so he's, I think, the first not debut, right? Because he's not been given his debut by Amarim, but he's the first player Amarim has brought in now that's not a that is has been more of like a fringe
Yeah.
academy player. We've seen Kukonki in training, if I'm pronouncing that
Yeah.
right, with the first team. Is there anybody else right now you would say is like at that point where they're probably you could see them getting some first team minutes. They might be ready to get some run outs even as a sub or whatever, as we saw like with even though we moved him on to the center back last year, was Kambuala, and we moved him on,
Yeah.
but he got in and made that step. And Konkonki's been in first team training. Is there anybody else? Would it be him, or is there anybody else that's maybe on that fringe first team level if we have the space for them?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's probably the hardest question to answer. I'll be honest. Even as someone that watches near enough every single game, I watch the games back 2 or 3 times because I'm often doing like compilation videos after the matches.
Yeah,
So I'm watching them on 2 times speed. So as someone that has got like a lot of video footage to analyze, there isn't. I don't think at the moment, I'll be honest, there isn't like a standout. The only special talent that I'd say in the academy right now, where it's someone that you think that has kind of like that Mainu-esque ability, is Shea Lacey.
right.
But he's been injured, right? He's been injured for a long
Yeah,
time, and he's the one where I would say you watch him play and you can say comfortably that he can do things on the pitch that nobody else can, and that's something that you'd felt when Kobe Mainoo was playing. But Shea, I think, obviously he's had his injury problems, so we're not going to see him for some time, and he hasn't played really much minutes against any men's teams. So there's going to be a delay on that. But in terms of, if you're asking me about who the best talent is coming through, I would definitely say Shea. And there've been concerns about his physicality
right.
and kind of how would he fare against men's football, and we haven't really had a chance to see that yet because, like I said, he's been injured. He hasn't had the opportunity to play against these men's teams, sort of, for the 21s against the national league sides or in the EFL Cup. He's not had that chance. But one thing that I would want to touch on about kind of like this whole sort of physicality argument is, Mantato, Bendita Mantato,
Yes, yes,
the
yeah,
the sort of the right winger or the right wing back, as everyone's saying, that's going to come through. He
yes.
he is someone that physically is there.
Okay.
But it's an interesting thing, right? So the reason I'm bringing him up is because there was a game a couple of months back that we played against Spurs under 18s, right? So it was under 18s match, and Mantata was playing right wing, and he was up against a really tall, physical fullback. Like, this guy
Mm,
was like 6'4", right, and really, really strong. And Mantato couldn't get anything out of him the entire game. And he's one of the quickest players that we've got in the squad. He's one of the strongest. And Lacey came on, I think, in about the 60th minute and just ran complete rings around this
interesting.
guy. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that sometimes it isn't necessarily all about physicality. I think
Yeah.
sometimes with the smaller players, it's about intensity. I think that's something that Shea perhaps needs to work on, is more of like the intensity of his game and his actions. Because there've been plenty of players in the Prem that have succeeded that are small, right? City for a
Mhm.
perfect example. They've got like sort of they've had David Silva, Phil Foden, Bernardo Silva, but
Yep.
what have those three players got in common is that they're all intense in their actions.
Yeah.
Physically, off the ball, on the ball. And if Shea can learn that, I don't think that sort of the size thing will be an issue because, like I said, in that game, he's up against this massive fullback, but he's not using the same kind of traits that Mantato is.
Yep.
And he's using that kind of like IQ and that on the ball ability to sort of manipulate things differently than what Mantato would. So Shea for me is like the outstanding talent in the academy. But in terms of like perhaps someone that we might see towards the end of the season, I definitely do think that we'll probably get a Chido OB debut by the end of the season. I do think we will. Um, Especially with how kind of like the striker situation is at the moment. And with Chido, I think the reason that he signed for us is that we kind of probably proposed to him that pathway was there. So when you're doing that, I think sometimes certain players can be pushed maybe more than others, and maybe when
Sure.
they're not quite ready, but they're kind of pushed because of the promises that we've made to him, right? And if you look at someone like Rio Nagoma for Liverpool, he's left Chelsea and gone to Liverpool. He started the other day, didn't he, for Liverpool
Mm.
in the FA
Yeah.
Cup? He's 16, right?
Yep.
I think if anyone would watch that kid, he's a fantastic talent, but to say that perhaps he's ready to start as a 16-year-old would maybe be a stretch. And I think perhaps
Right.
it's kind of like a scenario where they're just proving to him, like, look, this is why you signed for us. Like, this is the pathway for you.
Yeah,
And I
yeah. The
think that's
chances will
something that
be
might,
there. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's something that might come into play with Chido. I think towards the end of the season, I think we'll get a Chido debut. Um, the Kukonki one is interesting. How much have you seen of him?
Not much at all. I've just,
Mm,
we saw it coming into training. You can see his, obviously go back to the physicality discussion, his frame size, all of that
sure.
physical
Yeah.
levels are all there. But beyond that, I have no idea, and I see people calling all the time. He should be ready. He's the next guy, and I sit there
Yeah.
and I'm always question it when I hear that because I'm always like, how do you know, honestly? There's not that many people who watch enough academy to really know where these players are at, and
Yeah.
so not much, and that's why I was curious to ask you.
That's why I think it's so hard to predict because when he was included in training and when he was in that first match day squad, I was like, wow, like it really, really shocked me. And I don't mean to say that in like a sort of um negative way towards him to say that he's not good enough. It's just that it kind of came out of nowhere. He's played one game for the 21s and that was as a
Mm,
sub. So
so there's
it's
not a
just
lot
quite a
of
shock
like,
to see. Yeah,
yeah.
it is the sample size that we
Mm,
have for him. So the first time I watched him was for the under 16s. So the under 16s had a tour in Hong Kong.
yep.
Watched him play there, and then I also sort of after that, then the following summer he played for the under 16s in a tournament in Ireland. Sort of watched him there for 4 or 5 games, and obviously impressed. You know, he's like I said, he's very, very physical for his age, right? 6'3", 6'4" I think. Bit of a man mountain, especially against under 16 players as well, right?
Yep.
So he definitely impressed in those tournaments. But then he started playing for the under 18s this season, right? A bit of like a hybrid between a left back and a centre
Mm,
back. And he's played really, really well. I wouldn't say he's played to a level where you're like, this is like a Kobe Mainu talent where, every game you're
right.
just like,
You're
this
sure.
kid's
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
He's just been very, very solid. And before he got included in the first team squad, I had that same kind of like reservation as you because you can see the sort of physical profile is there. Like in terms of being ready for the Premier League, that's kind of if you were to build a centre back, you know, you'd look like a Conky, right? 6'4",
Yeah.
left-footed, you
Yeah.
know, um, good at covering ground, good on the ball. He's played left back a lot in the
Right.
younger age groups as well, so he's got that ability on the ball as well.
Yep.
So if you're designing a player that'd be ready for the Premier League football, it'd be him, in terms
Mhm.
of a defender, right? But I mentioned it on my Twitter the other day. Did you see it? The comparison I made with a former player that we had. Did you see that?
Yeah, yeah, who was it again? I'm missing the name,
Uh,
but I remember
so his
seeing
name
that.
was Bjorn Hardley.
Okay, right. Okay, that's it.
Um,
That's it.
and I think the my comparison kind of, I think, fell to the wayside a little bit once he got included in the first team squad, because that's kind of like a clear sign that, you know, they do really, really highly regard him. But I'll mention it anyway, just in case someone who doesn't follow me on Twitter didn't see it. But we basically had this academy player called Bjorn Hardley, back sort of like 4 or 5 seasons ago. He left about, I think it
Yeah.
was, he left with Iqbal, right? Didn't he? He left to Utrecht,
Yes, that's right. At the same
um,
time. Yep.
in that double deal. So the first year that I started watching the academy was that 2020-2021 season. So I watched him pretty much every game for the under 18s that year. And he's got, like, profile wise, exactly the same profile as Kukonki. He's like 6'4", he's left
Mm,
footed, he can play left back and centre back. And basically what I was trying to say to people is that season that Bjorn Hardley played for the under 18s, he was really, really good. Um, Both on the ball, off the ball. And he played for an under 18s team that essentially trounced every team that they played. Like, they came second that season, um, only to City, I think by a couple of points, and they did really, really well. But the point that I was trying to make is that as soon as he started going up to 21s football and sort of playing
mm,
against more physical, more athletic strikers, and against um, men's teams, he didn't have that same sort of standout quality. Like, each sort of, you could sort of tell that defensively he wasn't really up up in that sort of upper echelon of a player. He switched off defensively a lot, and he just, like, as someone that you thought was a big talent in under 18s football, started to sort of slowly become someone that you
right.
thought, no, this guy's not going to make it. And the reason why I made the comparison is that the team that Kukonki plays for now is very similar to the team that played in 2020-2021, is that they have 70% of the ball, and
Right.
they're usually 4 up by half time. So the pressure on the
You
defensive
don't
line
get as
isn't the
much
same.
defending, to see, right?
Yeah, the actions, the amount of actions are a lot lower, right? So it's easier for you to impress in those scenarios when, a ball comes through and you just sort of shepherd it out of play, or you're on the ball 50, 60 times a game, and you can show how good you are on the ball when you're 4-0 up and you've got that confidence. And the reason I made that comparison was just to try and, like, manage expectations a bit and just say, like, look, he's playing really, really well, but factor in the environment that he's in at the moment.
Yeah.
And that goes for all the centre backs that we have. But
Yes.
he then got included in first team training and then started becoming a squad, sort of a bench option. And then I thought, well, no, maybe he's not going to be, he's not going to follow the same sort of route as Hardley. And he's someone that probably is going to get a debut by the end of the season, right? Would you say? I mean,
Yeah, I
I would
mean,
say,
that's what I'm thinking now, that Collier's put in there. We're facing, as it gets busy again, we get into, Europa League rounds that will be coming up, as well as the FA Cup. There's got to be games where you're thinking you could bring him on at least as a sub, and I think the intention with him training with the first team is to get a debut by the end of the year and see
yeah.
how he does. Yeah, you would think so.
It's interesting though. I'm not going to remember the specifics here, but I remember when I was doing research on this, I did look up in sort of like the last 4 or 5 seasons what the youngest debutants were for centre backs, and I think the youngest debutant was, like, at the time that I was looking, was Will Fish for us when he was like
Mm,
18,
yeah.
and
Yep.
and the youngest debutants for defenders were, I think it was Rico Lewis,
Mm,
and Lewis Hall,
got it.
and I
Okay.
think at the time they were 17, and they were like high 17 as well. So
Yeah.
the number of players that debut, so Kukonki 16, right? So the number of players that, if he were to debut in the
As
Premier League with 16,
defenders,
that would
yeah,
be really, really rare. So if it does
interesting.
happen, that would be really, really interesting, because, like I said, it's not really a common occurrence. If you're debuting in the Premier League as a defender, you're usually a fullback. Um,
Right,
but I
yep.
suppose, in that three at the back system, you could say that
It's a
he's
little
got
more
more coverage there.
protected, yeah,
Yeah,
yep.
it's a little bit more protected, so you could probably argue that. And anyway, he has played left back, like I said. So
Right, he could
he
even come
technically
on as a
could come
left back,
on.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, not that I think that's his strongest position. I
Yeah,
think he's probably going to develop into a left centre back.
right.
Even though a lot of the games that he's played for the under 18s this season have been in that left back position, and I always wonder when I'm watching that, I always think sort of is that kind of like a long term plan that the club are doing, to put him in that left back position so that he's developing those on the ball skills, because the way that you press as a centre back is different to the way you press as a
Yes.
fullback, right? You
Yeah,
have less time on the ball, things like that. So
yeah.
I'm just wondering, is that perhaps a long term
Hmm.
vision that the club have, that they do see him as a centre back? It's just they're playing him there just to sort of develop that long term. It's interesting.
Yeah, it is, and the youth team is not play. They're not like switched formations to this to Amarim's three at the back or something like that at this point, right?
So the
I
21s
don't
have.
actually know what they've been doing, but go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so the 21s have. The 21s have kind
Okay.
of fluctuated between a 3 at the back and a 4 at the back. So,
Okay.
they have for some games and they haven't for others. And the under 18s have stayed the same. So the under 18s look exactly the same if they have, since Adam Lawrence took over. And that's one thing that I try to say to people, like when Ten Hag was with us, is that if you want a representation of perhaps Ten Hag football, it's the 21s, not the under 18s. The
Right. Right.
21s
Okay.
tend to represent the first team. And
Senior
oddly
level
enough,
more. Yeah.
I don't want this to become like a Ten Hag bashing session, but the 21s last season had a poor season, and they just were nowhere near as good as the under 18s, both on and off the ball.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the 21s have started moving to that 3 at the back system, but it's
Interesting.
been on and off. So I haven't really had, like, it's been a small sample size.
Yeah.
It's been about 2 games, I think, that they've
Okay.
probably played it. But it's good to see. I mean, I don't mind it. I think it's a good idea.
Well, if you're gonna
You
maybe
know,
bounce in training and things like that, as so often happens, it'd be good to be familiar, right, with the system that's
yeah.
there. So yeah, so this is an interesting question I have for you. Is that there's one of the things that has been talked about. So Jason Wilcox was obviously somebody who ran the academy, youth level at City,
Yeah.
and clubs like City and Chelsea have had a very different approach in the last
Mm,
10 years to United. Right now, City and Chelsea, I think, have been, however you rate this, more successful at the academy level in terms of their teams like winning things, right, and like winning
yeah.
leagues and being at the top. And then they've they've definitely been a lot more, what's the word for it? I don't know what you would say, but they move players, right? They move them quick. They
Mm,
they they move them a lot quicker, right? They get up, they sell them, they loan them, they move them, they get them out, and they get the next batch through really kind of fast. And it's not that they're not making debuts into the first team, because they do have them, but they are doing that. And there's definitely been, from my info as well as talk out there, there's going to be a shift a little bit, with Jason Wilcox coming in here, because a lot of this is PSRs, financial related, where it doesn't really pay to bring through all these academy players and then they just walk for free, right? And there's a lot of times we've seen that a lot of players get to that point where they kind of need to debut and get in the first team, or they need to go somewhere and play, and then they sit for another year or two, and then nothing happens and they fizzle out. We've seen it with Iqbal, we've seen it with other players like that, and then it doesn't really do much for anybody. And this is kind of a change, um, in intention, I think, where United have want to be, and it'll take time to see this, more
I've definitely
competitive
noticed
at
it.
the youth. You have, interesting. What
Mm,
would you say you've
yeah.
seen there that's changed?
Well, so we won the treble last season, right?
Yeah.
Kind of overthrown City's dominance in sort of like the Northern Division, and obviously we beat Chelsea in the final as well.
Yep.
Um, and especially this season, there've been plenty of games where I've gone, "Wow, the team is that strong." Like sort of
Hmm.
games where
Not the same
you
amount of
think,
rotations and things like that.
yeah, like I think
Hmm.
I don't have it in front of me, but I think towards the sort of the start of the season, we played the same starting 11 like 4 or 5 games in a row, and we're just trouncing teams, right? I mean, we've scored a ridiculous amount of goals.
Mm.
The under 18s are second in the league at the moment.
Okay.
But they've played 10 and won 10, so they've got a perfect record. It's just that City have played 2
Nice.
more games than us.
Got it. Okay.
So if we win those 2 games in hand, we'll go above them. But yeah, I've definitely noticed a switch in the last 2 years, especially this season though. Last season there were changes, but this season definitely there's less rotation and there's less inclusion of younger players in scenarios where perhaps you'd think they would be like and I'll be honest, I used to get quite annoyed with it sometimes.
Mm.
Where, like, for example, in prior seasons, we'd be like going for the title, for example, and then we'd have quite an important game, and then half the team would be changed, and
Because it was
we'd,
like
we'd
the
be
title
given like,
didn't matter, right? Yeah.
yeah, we'd be given like 3 or 4 debuts to players that you'd never seen before, and you think like, what's going on here? And we'd go on to lose the game or something, or drop points, and City would go on to win. And I get both sides. Like I've watched a lot of Nick Cox, and he definitely has that mindset, doesn't he? Of if we're winning every week comfortably, there's a problem. He said, I
Mm.
don't know if that's like a direct quote, but he said that if we're winning
Interesting.
every week and we're sort of battering teams, it doesn't bode well because it shows that we're not putting our teams and our players under enough pressure because we're clearly too good, right? And that's obviously been happening this season. And I've been thinking myself, like, why have we been doing this? Um, the only explanation that I can come towards is that perhaps we're trying to enhance the reputation of the academy
Right.
and
Yes.
not so much like we've always had a great academy, right? And we've always produced players for the first team. And I think, Nick Cox will tell you that that is the ultimate goal of the
Yep.
academy is players into the first team. Um, but what's like your secondary goal? And I do think that there has been a shift, and it's towards now maybe enhancing the reputation of the academy, so that when players need to be sold, or when sort of clubs are trying to sign them, is that we're getting a lot more money for them because of the fact
Right.
that they play for us. I don't think that's been the case for the last few. I mean, how many players have we sold? Academy players for absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and who've
And I'm
left
not,
for
and
free, guys. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
So many. Yeah.
and I'm not saying that the players have left. I'm not saying that the players have left in recent years have been better than City players, because they haven't. I think the players
Right.
that have left City for some money, are obviously better talents. It's just that sometimes I think what happens is that clubs sign players from clubs like City and Chelsea because of the reputation of those academies, and
Yes,
they think,
for sure
well,
they do.
this
Yeah.
guy, this kid's been a part of a winning setup for his entire career, and he knows what it means to be in a winning team. And there's like kind of like that reputation around those
Mm.
sort of academies. So I think we're trying to move towards that, maybe to try and help with PSR potentially. That's kind of like the only thing that I can think of. Obviously, the club might have a completely different opinion on that, but that's my guess,
No,
because it
I
makes
think
the
it's
most
quite
logical
accurate.
sense.
Yeah. I think it's quite accurate as to the mindset that they're going for, from what I understood. I put it a little more bluntly, just in the way that I do, about things being like a little more ruthless in the academy setup and things like that. But I
Yeah,
look at, in the past opportunities, players like Angel Gomez, that left for free and, didn't sign new deals and
yeah,
things where all of that. And you look and you'll see, City will sell someone to Southampton for 17 million that's never kicked the ball at a senior level. And you think, how's this, possible? But look at what it does for them.
yeah. I
Look
mean,
at
look how
what
much we
it
got
does
for
for
Alanga.
them. Yeah, right.
Briefly, just obviously he is a former academy player, but
Yeah.
he's a first team player now, so I don't want to go too much into it. But look at how much we got for him. How much was it? Like 15 million, I think it was.
Yes. Yes.
And I think the
Yes.
following season, didn't Newcastle bid 50 million for him that was rejected
Right.
or something like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
And obviously he's having a good patch at the moment, and that's exactly
Yep.
someone that we could have
Like,
got
why
way
wasn't
more
his
for.
reputation higher? Because he's obviously a Premier
Yeah,
League level player, one way or another, and that's valuable. But I agreed, and it makes sense to me. Like, the point you say there, I think is very much in line with it. You got to be successful. Like, I've made this, and you got to balance it right, because it's not like United's academy has been unsuccessful, but there's
no,
multiple goals, right? There's multiple directions for success that are not necessarily incompatible, but it's like Chelsea have had plenty of former academy players play in their teams. in their first team. They've had plenty, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we bought
I mean,
Mason Mount
look
for
at that
60
Chelsea squad
million
that won the
dollars.
Champions League.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they had a
look at
lot of.
that. Look at that.
Yep,
That photo. It's like that iconic photo of all of them together.
yep.
Um,
It's
you
not
know,
like they haven't done it, but they've
um,
also sold
no.
so many and made a lot of money in the process. And it's one of these oddities because you look at it like you don't want you. It's not about. I'm not saying you want necessarily to treat players like Chelsea do because there's an aspect to it that's very odd, that is a little unsettling,
Mm,
I think for United
yeah.
fans as well, given the history, I mean, it's in their first team too, right? They buy players, they sell players, like they leave them out. It's like their careers are very much at the beck and call of the club, and it gets a little wild there. But at the same time, there is that balance of like, why not have United be the most successful club that wins things too at the youth level and has this great reputation of winners of talent and does that then carry over, to those players. And I think there's something in that. I think there is a value in that.
It's quite a touchy subject as well because if you look at sort of the topic you're on about in terms of like replacement and if players aren't good enough, ship them on and stuff. But if you look at someone like if you look at Chelsea and City, for example, as the prime examples, the amount of players that they sign between kind of like that under 14 to under 18 age
Yep.
group is significantly higher than the rest of the country,
Yeah.
and they spend a lot of time and resources on scouting in that kind of age group, and we've seen a lot more of that in recent years from United as well.
Yep.
And it's actually like I always sort of see it as sort of like untapped potential. And it's something that I'm glad that the club's doing now because if you're signing the best 14, 15, 16-year-old talents in the country, there's going to be a cap on how much you spend on those. For example,
Yes.
Chido, for example, I mean, how much did we spend on him? It was probably pennies compared to potentially what he could be worth. So if you're able to convince these players to join you, and obviously it's harder now because of Brexit. Teams are having to fight against each other for the British talent. You're not, City can't spend all of their time and resources in Spain and in Germany and things like that.
Yep.
It's because you can't sign players under the age of 18 to,
Yep.
come straight into your academy. So everyone's kind of focusing on English clubs now, so the
Yeah.
competition is harder. But if you can grab those players and if you can sign those players, even if it doesn't work out quite how you expect, like if you sign a Cheeto, for example, but he goes on to be a very good player, you can get 10, 15 million for him. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
something that we've seen City do
And big
loads of
profit.
recently,
Yeah.
and Chelsea.
Yeah.
Players that haven't perhaps quite made it into their first team, but because they've picked them from other clubs around the country, that kind of like that age group for really, really cheap, they can then sell them on because they were the best of the bunch at that time, and they just didn't quite develop maybe how they wanted to, but they can make a significant amount of money off them. And I think, like I said, that's why it's a touchy subject because you don't want to view necessarily academy players like that. You don't want to see them
Yeah.
as vessels of PSR. You
Assets
want them,
and money assets. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And I think I won't go into it, but that's kind of like sort of where we're at with this whole kind of conversation with Garnacho and Mainu, right?
Yeah.
You know, um, yeah. I mean, I won't go too much into that, but I did say on my social media the other day is that if we are going to sell someone like Garnacho, it has to be one, we've had a very, very high offer for him.
Yep.
And two, that the club don't view him as someone that's going to develop much beyond where he's at currently. I don't think we should accept kind of like a mid-range offer for someone like that because I don't think it sets a good precedent for
Right.
the academy players that we currently have. And I don't think it sets a good precedent for the academy players that we might try and sign, right?
Yeah.
Um, if they're viewed as sort of commodities where we're just going to bring you in and just sell you off a PSR. I don't think that sets a good message. So yeah, like I said, I won't go too much into Garnacho because that's not where I'm on. But it's an interesting conversation, isn't it, around like kind of like the PSR and things like that.
Yep. Yeah, and I've tried to make it clear, and just because obviously it is a topic to make it clear on this point with like Garnacho, because I've tried to clear it up too. When you get the stories like, oh, Manu's available and Garnacho's available, it's not really intended to be like that because it's not going to be. They really don't want it to be like as you just described. They really don't want it to be like that. That it's like, oh, there's no value in keeping these players that are broken into the first team if we get any money. If
Mm.
Garnacho leaves, And obviously, there is totally truth in clubs looking at him and Napoli looking at him and being interested and having discussions with his agent and all of that. The club will move a player on. The first thing that's primarily there is that the player has to want to go. Okay. And I'm not trying to like spin something onto Garnacho on this. If he leaves, it's because he wants to go. You can see with Rashford, he talks about he wants to leave. Well, this is our
Yeah.
longest serving player at the entire club, and Marcus Rashford, right? And but he expressed desire for a new challenge. He will go primarily because of that. They kept him when they could have sold him for profit, in summer and things like that as well. So it is finding the right balance. It's not just that, the Kobe Manu's not going to go anywhere. He's going to sign a new contract. It's not really a concern, but I think it's important that it gets stated right too, so that it doesn't bring the wrong representation to youth players who might be looking to come through, that they could just be moved on in an instant for money. It would take a lot, and you'd have to want to leave. And if Garnacho does end up leaving, that'll be the reason, is that he wants to go somewhere he feels where maybe there's a better opportunity, and a big offer kind of comes in above, some. It's not just like a 30-40 million for whatever, type of
Yeah.
thing to raise some cash. So I do think that's important, because we don't want United to become that club either, that it's the players are pure financial commodities. You
No,
move on in an
it's never
instant.
been like that, has it?
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
it
never
never
been
has
like
and
that
never
for
should
us.
be.
Um, but it's like you said, it's a touchy subject because you've got to find that right
Yes.
balance, right?
Yeah.
I'm not here saying if we get a 65 million bid for Garnacho, we shouldn't sell him because it means that some 16-year-old from, I don't know, Chelsea's not going to want to join us 2 years from down the line.
Right.
I'm not trying to say that, but
Yeah.
the thing that I put out on my Twitter was just that don't be surprised if we start doing that more often for
Yeah.
perhaps players that don't quite deserve to go,
Yep.
that we don't start picking up these Chido OB players. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
I think
Yes, I do.
players like
Yep.
Chido join us because they truly believe that as a club we care about academy players in a way that others don't. And when we sign you, it's because we think that you're going to be a first team player and you've got that pathway. We're not going to sign you just because we can make a quick buck. Even though I said 10 minutes ago, it is a cheat code FFP wise for us to
Yeah.
do that. We
Yep.
can pick up 4 or 5 of the best talents and hoard them in the academy and make money off of them. It's whether or not you think that's a good thing or not.
Right.
I think there's 2 sides to the story on it.
Yep. And it definitely finding the balance. And I've got one more question for you that is
Sure.
semi-academy-ish. I'm sure it has some. So I think that, if I'm correct in saying, there's been a lot more talk talent wise of like the under 18s level than under 21s. And I think it was
Yeah.
before, like they were the under 16s group is a bit stronger, right? Than the
Mhm.
slightly older group as well.
Mhm.
Um, but also I want to say that, we've had this interesting thing coming, which probably has a lot to do with Wilcox and Mavel on board now, of signing like just 18-year-old, like Kone coming in, and he's injured right now, but he's going to play a little on the academy, but he's probably slated for the first team. And then you have Diego Leon, right, who was there 2 days ago, and he'll join in summer when he turns 18. These fringe, like just turned 18s from outside England, come in where they're on the fringe of that under 21s, but they're probably slated for the first team if all goes according to plan. And there might be more like that coming through under this strategy, because of course, the Red Bull clubs where Vivella has a lot of experience. They did that a lot, right? Bringing these players in from around the world to kind of almost get in there. What do you think of this? Is you think is part of this because the under 21s just don't have that much, first team ready, and we need more options to be able to see. And uh, I don't know, what just in general, what do you think about this? Because it's different. Just your microphone, I think you might tap the button. You go. You're
Sorry, I
good.
was on
You
mute
go
then.
ahead. Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah,
Go
my
ahead.
bad. No, I was just saying I love these signings. These are like my favorite
Yes.
types of signings.
Yeah.
It just reminds me of Ahmad, right?
Yes.
Um, you know, Ahmad played in the
And
academy for a really
Garnacho, we
short
signed
while.
him. It was only like 1 year, right? Before he debuted.
Well, we signed him at 16. So he had that first season in the 2020-21 season, and then the following
Right.
season was when he had that breakout season where
Yes. Okay.
the
Yep.
the FA Youth Cup win,
Okay.
and kind of like
Okay.
that rapid trajectory upwards.
Yep.
Um, and just quickly on that, just in terms of, I think maybe it's good time to talk about it, and I'll answer your question about the sort of Leon kind of Kone signings. Is that uh, Garnacho's development for me is what we might see from a lot of the current under 18s players.
Okay.
It's that comparing him to Mainoo, right? So when you watch Mainoo, whenever you watched him, you always felt that, this guy's first team ready. You just look at
Yeah.
him as a whole package. You thought this guy is a first team player, and you just needed to see him perhaps in those 21s games just for a little while, and just against those men's teams. And once you saw him in that environment, you were like, yeah, this is a certified first team player. But when Garnacho
Right.
joined, he really wasn't. That first season that he played
Yeah.
for us, he
Interesting.
was sort of like third, fourth choice as a winger, and he didn't
Mm.
really look that good. And then the following season, month by month, you just saw that continual improvement, better and better and better and better. And loads of areas of his game just got much better. And I think that's what we might see from the current COP. Because, like I said, I don't think there's anyone right now that's in that kind of like upper echelon, apart from Lacey, in terms of like a talent that's special.
Got it.
So we
Okay.
might see a lot of players like Chido, like Ibrahimov, like Mantato, like Kukonki, that in this second half of the season, we might see that kind of like Garnacho-esque level where just month on month, you just start to see them
They get
develop.
better
But
and better. Yeah.
yeah, and going back to your question about sort of like those types of signings, they're my favorite. Like I said, I mean, when Ahmad joined, just watching him in the academy was just probably the
It was
most
it
fun
was
I've.
wild. It
It was
was really
so good.
cool.
And I remember when Kone, so there was that game that Kone played, the game that Kone got injured in, the
Yeah.
EFL game. The timeline felt exactly the same that night as it did to when Ahmad first played in the academy. You could just tell that
Mm.
everyone was there to watch Kone play, and there's
Yep.
that level of excitement there. And I think you're right in terms of the 21s right now. There isn't kind of like that definitive player that you look at and think that's a first teamer there, and that's why it's so difficult to predict right now, because um, there are a lot of players there that perhaps aren't first team level, but potentially in
Mm.
6 months could be, because they have that Garnacho West development where like month by month they just get better and better and better. But it's hard to say. But I'm all for these types of signings. I think they're great. I think they raise the level of the academy, and the standards go up when sort of you bring players like that in.
Nice. Yeah, well, I'm excited. Hopefully we'll get to see more, of them. But then I think, sometimes the under 21s can suffer where you got the best players in there end up going into the first team and then, playing minutes in the first team and rather than at the youth level. And that can affect it. Not that that's a bad
Yeah,
thing because it's kind of that age group, you're kind of, that's what you're sort of expecting
it's
as
the
well.
21s is an odd one right now because they're seventh in the league,
Mm.
and they've always kind of been in that kind of position. They've always been sort of sixth to mid-table kind of level. They've always been that kind of area, but you've accepted it because it's
Yeah.
continuously produced players for the first team,
Yep.
and maybe not. They've maybe not stayed in the first team, but they've been players that have contributed in some way, shape, or form, or perhaps should have. If you look at the last few
Right. Yeah.
seasons, you've got Garnacho, Mainoo, Hannibal, Alvaro Fernandez.
Yep.
These type of players. Some of them may not have stayed with us, but they're potentially players that could become first team players, and
Mm.
there isn't quite like that clear player or players right now that you could say that for at the moment. So
Right. Sure.
like we were touching on earlier on, we're kind of looking at more now what under 18s players can make a difference. And it's odd because what you often find is that the players that come into the first team don't spend too much time in 21s football. That that movement from under 18s to first team can be very quick for the best of the
Yes.
best. We
Yep.
saw it with Rashford, we saw it with Greenwood, we saw it with Mainoo, we saw it with Garnacho. The best of the best don't tend to spend too much
Mm.
time there. So
Yep.
I'm not too bothered about perhaps there not being clear candidates for the first team in the 21s, because like I said, that development from under 18s to first team can be quite quick. Which is why I'm excited for players like Chido and Kukonki and what have you.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool. Well, I guess we'll see there. I didn't have anything else for this one. I figured if we, we do more, we'll kind of check in, see if there's been how things are going. Any players starting to stand out more or improving as we go through the rest of the
Mm.
season and all of that. But I think that about covers what I was
Yeah, I
hoping to
think
today. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
yeah, just I thought I'd mention really quickly, just like a bit of fun at the end. I'd say two players to watch out for the rest of the season would be Jim Thwaites
Okay.
and Tyler Fletcher. I really, really like those two players. So Jack is the left-footed number 10, and Tyler is kind of like that number 6, number 8. And I've been
Okay.
really, really impressed with Tyler Fletcher the last few months.
Nice.
He looks like a really good player, and Jim Thwaites as well. So I don't know if you saw, but I did. It's a small breaking news story, but I did say that as soon as he turned 17, the club have given him a long-term contract. So the
Right.
club clearly rate him, and he is, you know, really, really good.
Awesome.
Again, he's one of those players that he's small, so there's like that caveat with him, but on the ball, he is exceptional, and he's definitely the best ball striker in the academy and that I've seen in the last few
Interesting.
years.
Interesting.
Yeah, Jim Thwaites is someone to really look out for. Just quickly, I thought I'd ask you if you've got time.
Yeah.
What do you think about the Harry Mass situation?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually thought of it earlier when we were chatting, and I meant to mention it. It's an odd one, isn't it? Because he was kind
Mm,
of when you think about the academy, there's a lot of hype on Harry Amos as a left back, and then he comes through preseason and he's there, right? He's playing, he's doing it regularly. The concerns I've heard are things to at that time where was he when he played against because he's again a small player,
in that
you know
preseason game.
yeah, and you could kind of see
Mm.
against the more physical teams, he struggled to keep up.
It's so
Now, we were
strange.
also playing a back four at the time where you need
Yeah,
to do a lot more defending than you would presently under Ruben Amorim. But by the time Amorim came in, it feels like there's a little bit of a rift with Harry Amos.
it's an odd one, isn't it?
You
Because he's
know,
not even been in training. I don't think I've
yeah,
even seen him
there's
pictured in training. And to go
there,
from pretty much be included in near enough every squad, obviously not come on, but
yeah,
to be in near enough every squad and training to then, you know, he was playing under 18s football not many weeks ago, which was
yep,
another one that just completely shocked me. He was playing under 18s football a couple of months ago. It was
yep,
only for the odd game, but to go from that to what he was doing under Ten Hag is quite a surprise. And I've always said this. Amas was in that like Alvaro Fernandez level where you'd watch the academy and a left back would be the standout player every game.
yeah,
Because Alvaro was like that. Alvaro was exactly the same.
hmm
And Amas was the same. You'd watch a 21s game or an under 18s game and your left back's the best player. And if it wasn't for Wheatley having such a crazy season last season, Amas would have won player of the year. And um, I said it as well. I actually went back and watched watched back every goal that we conceded in that season that we won the treble with him as the left back for the under 18s, and near enough every goal came from the opposite side. Hardly any goals came from
interesting,
his side, and he never got beaten by by an attacker. And what I mean by that is like in terms of throughout the course of a game, you know, he would never come off worse, and
right,
um, he would always excel against like those tricky pacey wingers. Whereas when you watch Alvaro, that was like kind of like the caveat that you had when you watched him. You thought, God, this
sure,
guy's really
he
good on
could
the
get
ball,
beat,
but when he comes up
yeah,
against someone that is pacey and direct, he would struggle. Whereas Amas didn't have that problem. So it's interesting in terms of like I'm not saying that this is wrong, but like that information about like the physical side of his game, that did surprise me a little bit because, like I said, whenever you'd watch him in academy football, that would never be an issue. He'd always
hmm
do really really well against those strong athletic wingers. So and I know that first team football is different, but there are
yeah,
a lot of academy footballers that would cook senior left backs,
yeah,
right? Because
yeah.
of their athleticism, because of their pace, right? And he always did really, really well. So to go, like I said, to go from near enough getting a debut to where he's at now, it's just an odd one, isn't it?
It is odd because even with that, I would say that I thought there was enough to think he might get a chance. And then you look at, Luke Shaw has been out the whole season, and
Yeah.
Malacia is not, you know, after being out for so long with his injuries, he's obviously not
Yeah.
really at the level. And you think if there was ever a time for a player to break through, that's the position, and he's not anywhere near it. And
No, and
it
that's
is odd. It's just an odd thing
yeah.
going on there.
And that's what I thought with Amas was, not to disrespect Malacia, he's gone through something horrendous with the
Yeah,
injuries that he's had.
yeah,
But you've seen him come back, and he's not had that same intensity or
correct.
athleticism that
Yeah,
he did before. And you
yeah.
watch him play, and you think there's no way Amas could be any worse than that.
Uh,
So yeah, it is
That's what I
surprising.
think, but
He's definitely one of those players, though, that in that sort of 21 setup, you could say, he'll do well in the championship. He should do well in the championship.
sure.
Whereas you see a lot of the other players that are in the 21s team are kind of going down to like League One, League Two level.
Yeah,
He's one of those players that I think could hold his own at the championship. And
yeah.
that for me is a good sign, because if you can do well in the championship, it means that you're a good player. Look at
Yeah, we
Alvaro,
saw
for
with
example.
Ahmad as well too. I mean, what
Yeah,
he did
yeah,
at Sunderland, right? Yeah,
yeah, and Alvaro as well with Preston. I
yeah.
think Preston were in the championship when he went there, right?
I
It's a
believe
couple of years
so.
ago
If I
now.
believe you're right.
Yeah,
I believe you're right.
he won Young Player of the Year there, right?
Yeah.
And like I said, Alvaro was a player that I thought would perhaps struggle against athletic wingers in the men's game, but he did exceptionally well in the championship, and look what he's doing now. So
Yeah.
I don't see why Amas couldn't do that. And I'd be surprised if we let him go, I'll be honest. But he is sort of that player that you do think you could get a good sum for. Um,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
again, it's like we haven't given him the opportunity to potentially raise that value. Where in
Correct.
scenarios where I thought we might have, do you know what I mean? If we can give him a
Yeah.
couple of games for 10, 15 minutes at the end, that's going to increase his value
It would
just
help.
like
Yeah.
that. So
Yep.
yeah, I just thought I'd talk about that, because for me, as someone that watches the academy a lot, it's a surprise that he's not had some involvement. I'm not here saying that he's going to be our next left back for the next 10 years. I'm not trying to say that. It's just that I've been surprised. That's all. But yeah,
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. All right. Well, we're gonna leave it there, and that's been great. So, again, I'll leave some links to Academy Reunited, your Twitter, X, and other YouTube and things like that down below on this video. For anybody watching, make sure to follow,
thank
and
you.
then hopefully you'll have your own videos, some more coming soon.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I'm
but
trying. Yeah,
otherwise, we'll keep
obviously there's
up
been a
as
bit of a break.
well. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
there's been a
Otherwise,
bit of a
we'll
break,
keep
isn't
up
there?
and
Yeah.
go ahead, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, there's been a bit of a break, isn't there? There's been like a winter break, but the under 18s are back this week on Friday in the FA Youth
Cool.
Cup against Preston North End. So that'll be some content that I can perhaps get out, or we can discuss in the next video.
Awesome. Yeah, sounds good. All right. Well, appreciate it very much, man. And again, to everybody
No worries.
watching, make sure like, follow, subscribe, and follow his channels as well. And we'll see you later.
Don't be too mean in the comments.
Yeah, they'll be nice. They'll be nice to you, not to me. They'll be nice to you. You'll be fine. All right. Have a good one, everyone.